I remember the exact moment I decided to risk my entire career. It was a Tuesday morning in the nephrology wing at Mount Sinai. The air smelled like antiseptic and desperation. I was filling out palliative care paperwork for Megan Hartley, 37 years old, end-stage renal failure. And her husband, the only compatible donor, had just refused to save her life. He stood there in his expensive suit, arms crossed. Richard Hartley, 40 years old, perfectly healthy, and completely unwilling to help the woman he'd promised to love forever. I watched him sign the refusal form without even looking at his wife. The pen moved across the paper like it was drawing her death sentence. "I'm not risking my body for someone who lied to me for years," he'd said earlier. His voice was cold, detached, like he was discussing a business deal that went bad, not the life of the woman he'd shared a bed with for 15 years. Megan lay in the hospital bed, too weak to speak. Tears streamed down her face, but she made no sound, just these silent sobs that shook her entire body. The monitors beeped steadily in the background, counting down what little time she had left. I'd seen a lot of difficult cases in my transplant career, but nothing like this. Nothing that felt so personal. While Richard walked out of the room, his expensive shoes clicking against the linoleum floor, I noticed Megan's bag sitting on a chair, a simple leather tote worn at the edges. She must have left it there during the evaluation. Something made me look inside. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at me earlier, like she had something more to say but couldn't find the words. My fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper tucked between her wallet and a small makeup bag. The envelope was plain, but the handwriting caught my attention. "For Richard, in case I don't wake up." I shouldn't have read it. I knew that. Patient confidentiality, professional ethics, all of it screamed at me to put the letter down. But something in Megan's eyes when she looked at her husband, something in the way Richard had refused without even hearing her out, I had to know. The paper felt fragile in my hands, like it might crumble if I held it too tightly. Megan's handwriting was shaky, probably from the weakness, but every word was clear. She wrote about being 17 and pregnant, about giving a baby girl up for adoption before she ever met Richard, about how she'd tried to tell him so many times, but the words never came out right, how the secret became this heavy thing between them, growing larger every year until she couldn't lift it anymore. "You deserve to hate me," she wrote, "but I still hope you'll save me, not because I deserve it, but because you're better than my silence." I stood there in that cold hospital room, holding this woman's most private confession. The weight of it pressed against my chest. This wasn't just about a medical procedure anymore. This was about two people who'd built their lives on something unspoken. This was about the secrets we carry and what they cost us. I found Richard in the waiting area. He was staring out the window at the New York skyline, his back to me. The city moved on below us, unaware of the small tragedy unfolding in this sterile room. He turned when I approached. His eyes were dry, his face carefully blank. I didn't say anything, just handed him the letter. Our fingers brushed briefly, and I could feel the tension in his hand. He looked from the envelope to my face, questioning. I simply nodded toward the paper in his hand. What happened next would change everything. For them, for me. But in that moment, all I could do was watch him unfold the truth his wife had carried for 15 years. I keep wondering how far this story will reach. Comment below what city you're watching from, just so I know I'm not alone in this. My hands were shaking as I walked away from Richard. The waiting room doors swung shut behind me, but I couldn't bring myself to go far. I stood just outside, leaning against the cold wall. The hospital hummed around me, nurses chatting at their station, a gurney rolling by, the distant sound of someone's family laughing too loud. Normal hospital sounds that felt completely wrong today. Through the small window in the door, I watched Richard. He hadn't moved from where I left him, still standing by that big window overlooking Central Park. The letter was open in his hands now. I saw his shoulders tense up, then slump, then tense again. He read it once, twice, a third time. His head dropped forward, and for a moment I thought he might collapse right there. I remembered meeting them both 6 months earlier during their initial consultation. Richard had held Megan's hand the entire time. He'd asked all the right questions about recovery time, risks, long-term outcomes. He'd taken notes on his phone. He seemed like the perfect, supportive husband. Megan had smiled at him like he hung the moon. I'd thought to myself, now there's a couple who really gets it. How wrong I was. The Richard I saw through that window now was a different man from the one who'd coldly signed the refusal form an hour earlier. That Richard had been all sharp edges and business decisions. This Richard looked broken. He brought the letter closer to his face, his hands trembling so badly the paper rattled. I saw him wipe at his eyes with the back of his hand. Then he sank into one of those awful plastic waiting room chairs, the letter still clutched in his fist. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Nurses walked past me, giving me curious looks. Dr. Patel from cardiology stopped to ask if I was okay. I just nodded, unable to explain why I was standing there frozen, watching a man read his wife's confession. When Richard finally stood up, he looked older. The confident businessman posture was gone. He walked differently, slower, heavier. He came through the doors and our eyes met. His were red-rimmed but clear. He didn't say anything to me, just nodded once, a small, tired movement, and walked past me toward the examination rooms. I followed him, my heart pounding in my chest. He stopped at the nurse's station where Sarah was updating charts. "I need to speak with Dr. Blake," he said. His voice was rough, like he'd been screaming, though I knew he hadn't made a sound in that waiting room. Sarah looked from him to me, confused. "Is there a problem, Mr. Hartley?" "No problem," he said. "I've changed my mind. I want to do the donor evaluation again. I'll donate my kidney to my wife." The words hung in the air between us. Sarah's eyes widened. She looked at me for confirmation. I just nodded, still processing what was happening. "I'll need to check if Dr. Blake is available," Sarah said, reaching for the phone. "I'll wait right here," Richard said. He leaned against the counter, his shoulders slumped. The letter was still in his hand, now crumpled from how tightly he'd been holding it. When Dr. Blake emerged from his office, he took in the scene. Richard standing there looking wrecked, me hovering nearby, Sarah looking confused. "Richard?" Dr. Blake said. "What's going on?" "I'm doing it," Richard said. "I'll donate to Megan. Run all the tests again, whatever you need." Dr. Blake glanced at me, a question in his eyes. I gave a slight shake of my head. This wasn't my story to tell. "Are you sure?" Dr. Blake asked Richard. "This is a major decision. You seemed very certain earlier." Richard looked down at the letter in his hands. "I was wrong," he said, quietly. "About a lot of things." He unfolded the paper carefully, smoothing out the creases. "She tried to tell me, multiple times over the years. I remember now. There were moments where she'd start to say something, then stop herself. I was always too busy with work to really listen, too focused on building the perfect life to notice the cracks in our foundation." He looked toward Megan's room down the hall. 15 years, he whispered. She carried this for 15 years. How lonely she must have felt. Dr. Blake placed a hand on Richard's shoulder. "Let's go to my office and talk through the next steps. We'll need to—" "No," Richard interrupted. "I want to see Megan first. I need to talk to her." I watched him walk down that long hallway toward his wife's room. His steps were slow but determined. He paused outside her door, taking a deep breath before pushing it open. Through the doorway, I saw Megan's face light up when she saw him. Then confusion when she saw his expression. He went to her bedside, taking her hand in both of his. He said something too quiet for me to hear. Megan's eyes filled with fresh tears. Then Richard was crying too, his head bowed over their joined hands. I turned away, giving them their privacy. But not before I saw Richard reach into his pocket and pull out the letter, placing it gently on the bedside table between them. The truth was out now. No more secrets between them. Just two broken people trying to find their way back to each other in a sterile hospital room. I walked back to my desk, my own hands still unsteady. I'd crossed so many professional lines today. I'd read a patient's private letter. I'd interfered in a marriage. I'd potentially saved a life. Or maybe I'd just opened up a different kind of wound. The paperwork for Megan's palliative care still sat on my desk where I'd left it. I picked it up, looking at the forms that would have essentially signed her death warrant. Then I walked them over to the shredder and watched the pieces disappear. When I returned to Megan's room 20 minutes later, Richard was sitting in the chair beside her bed, holding her hand. Both of them were talking quietly, their heads close together. The letter sat between them, its words now spoken aloud after 15 years of silence. "Dr. Blake is scheduling the tests for first thing tomorrow morning," Richard was saying as I approached. "Whatever they need from me, I'll do it." Megan looked up at me, her eyes clearer than I'd seen them in weeks. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. This wasn't over yet. The transplant was still risky. Their marriage had deep wounds that needed healing. But for the first time since Megan had been admitted, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope. Richard looked up at me. "I'd like to restart the donor process," he said formally, though his eyes were soft. "Please." I picked up the chart at the end of Megan's bed, my pen feeling lighter than it had all day. "Of course," I said. "Let's get started." The monitors continued their steady beeping, but the room no longer felt like it was counting down to an ending. It felt like a beginning. A complicated, painful beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. I find myself thinking about all the unspoken words between people, all the secrets we carry that shape our lives in ways we never expect. I wonder how different things might have been if Megan had found her voice sooner, if Richard had been better at listening, if I hadn't seen that letter peeking out of her bag. Life turns on these small moments, these chances we take or don't take. Today, I took a chance, and it changed everything. I keep wondering how many other stories like this are playing out in hospitals across the country right now. How many silent struggles happening behind closed doors. It makes me want to know I'm not the only one witnessing these human moments. Comment below what city you're watching from. I need to know this story is reaching someone out there. The transplant coordinator, Linda, pulled me aside after Richard left Megan's room. Her face was tight with concern. "Ethan, are you sure about this? He refused less than 2 hours ago. What changed his mind?" I looked down the hall toward Megan's room. The door was still closed. "He read something," I said, keeping it vague. "He understands the situation differently now." "The hospital board won't like this," she whispered, stepping closer. "If this goes badly, if he changes his mind again mid-process, it's your license on the line. You pushed for this donor match from the beginning." She was right. I had. From the first time I met the Hartleys, I believed Richard was the answer. He was healthy, compatible, and he loved his wife. Or so I thought. Now, the foundation of their relationship had cracked open, and I was standing in the fissure. "I'll take responsibility," I told her. Back in my office, I pulled up Megan's file. The pre-op checklist for a living donor transplant scrolled down my screen. It was long. Psych eval, cross-match testing, CT angiogram. Each step was a hurdle. Each one a place Richard could still back out. My phone buzzed. It was the hospital administrator, Dr. Evans. "Ethan, I'm hearing there's a development with the Hartley case." Word traveled fast here. The nephrology wing was a small town. "Richard Hartley has consented to the donation," I confirmed, choosing my words carefully. "After a very public refusal," Dr. Evans said. His tone was flat. "I need to be certain this is stable. The last thing Mount Sinai needs is a messy, emotional withdrawal on surgery day. The press would have a field day." "I'm confident," I lied. Or maybe I hoped it into truth. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair. The weight of what I'd done settled on my shoulders. I hadn't just handed Richard a letter. I'd set a bomb in the middle of their marriage, and now I was asking them to walk across the debris and trust me with their lives. A soft knock pulled me from my thoughts. Richard stood in my doorway. He looked drained. The expensive suit he'd worn earlier now seemed to hang on him. "Can we talk?" he asked. I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. He sat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He ran a hand through his hair. It was a gesture of pure exhaustion. "I need to know something," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "Did you know about the letter before you gave it to me?" The question hung between us. This was the moment. I could lie, protect myself, say I had no idea what was in it. But I was tired of lies. This hospital room was already too full of them. "I read it," I said quietly. "I shouldn't have. It was a violation of your wife's privacy, and yours. But I saw how she looked at you when you refused. I saw the despair, and I saw the envelope. I made a choice." He absorbed this, his expression unreadable. He stared at a spot on my desk. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. "I'm glad you did," he finally said, his voice thick. "If you hadn't, I would have let her die believing I hated her for a lie. The truth is, I was looking for a way out." The confession startled me. "A way out of the donation?" "A way out of the marriage," he corrected, his voice a low whisper. "Things haven't been good for a long time. The business trips I took, they were longer than they needed to be. We've been living like roommates for years. When she got sick, it felt like a trap. The donation felt like a life sentence, a reward for a marriage that was already dead." He looked up, his eyes begging me to understand. "And then I read her letter, about being 17 and alone, about being scared, and I realized I haven't been her partner in a long time. I haven't tried to see her, really see her. She was carrying this enormous grief, this loss, and I was just annoyed that she seemed distant." He pulled the crumpled letter from his pocket. "She wrote that I'm better than her silence, but I'm not. Her silence was a prison, but my indifference was the guard." I didn't know what to say. This was far beyond my medical training. This was the raw, ugly truth of a failing marriage, and it had landed squarely in my lap. "The donation," I started, cautiously. "Is this about saving your wife, or is it about guilt?" He considered this, turning the question over in his mind. "It's about a second chance," he said, "for both of us. Maybe we can't fix 15 years of distance, but I can't let her die while I still have the ability to save her. That's not the man I want to be. That's not the man she married." He stood up, placing the letter back in his pocket. "Schedule the tests, all of them. I'm not changing my mind again." After he left, I sat for a long time in the silence of my office. This was no longer a straightforward transplant. It was an attempt at redemption, a surgical Hail Mary for a relationship on life support. The risks were higher than any textbook could quantify. I picked up the phone and dialed the lab. "This is Dr. Blake. I need to reinitiate the living donor workup for Richard Hartley. Yes, immediately." As I gave the instructions, I looked at the family photo on my desk. My wife and our 2 kids smiling on a beach. I thought about the small silences that had started to grow in my own marriage, the missed dinners, the forgotten anniversaries, the unspoken frustrations. Richard's words echoed in my mind. Her silence was a prison, but my indifference was the guard. I was risking my career on the hope that a kidney could bridge a chasm of lies and neglect. I was betting on the slim chance that in saving Megan's life, Richard might also save what was left of their love. The tests would tell us if his body was still compatible, but no scan could show me if their hearts still were. What would you have done? If you were in my shoes, holding that letter, knowing it could save a life or destroy a career, would you have taken that chance? The next morning, the hospital felt different. The air in the nephrology wing was charged. I walked past the nurses' station, and everyone was quiet. They were all watching me. They knew what I'd done. Linda, the transplant coordinator, gave me a tight smile. It didn't reach her eyes. She was holding a stack of forms, Richard's new consent forms. Richard was already in the pre-op testing area. He was sitting on the edge of an examination table, wearing a hospital gown. He looked smaller without his suit. He was staring at the wall, his hands resting on his knees. He didn't look up when I came in. "Good morning, Richard," I said. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet room. He finally turned his head. "Dr. Blake." His voice was flat, tired. "Let's just get this over with." The phlebotomist came in to draw blood for the final cross-match. She was efficient, professional. She tied the rubber tourniquet around his arm. Richard watched the needle go into his vein. He didn't flinch. His blood filled the vials, dark red, proof of his commitment. Or his guilt. I still didn't know which. "This will take a few hours to process," the phlebotomist said, labeling the tubes. Richard just nodded. He looked past her, toward the door. "How is she this morning?" "Megan is stable," I told him. "Her spirits seem better." It was true. When I'd done my rounds earlier, Megan had been sitting up. She'd even managed a small breakfast. The hope was already having a physical effect. "Did she ask about me?" The question was quiet, almost shy. "She did," I said. "She wanted to know if you'd slept." He let out a short, harsh breath that was almost a laugh. "I didn't. I sat in a hotel room across the street and stared at the ceiling. I read her letter about 20 more times." He looked down at his arm, where a small bandage was now placed. "I kept thinking about her at 17, alone, going through that. And I've been complaining about late nights at the office." The CT tech arrived then, wheeling in a large machine. It was time for the renal CT angiogram. They needed to map the blood vessels of his kidneys, to make sure there was nothing abnormal, to make sure he was, physically, still the perfect candidate. I left him there, lying on the table as the machine whirred to life. I walked down to Megan's room. She was awake, her IV pole beside her bed. She was looking out the window at the New York skyline. "He's doing the tests now," I said, standing in her doorway. She turned, and her face was so full of fragile hope it almost hurt to look at. "Really? He's really doing it?" "He is. The blood draw is done. He's in for his CT scan now." Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled. A real, genuine smile. "I didn't think, after everything, I thought I'd lost him for good." "People can surprise you," I said, leaning against the doorframe. She started, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I never meant for anyone else to read it, especially not you. I know, and I am deeply sorry for that invasion, but I'm not sorry for the result." She played with the edge of her hospital blanket. "What did he say after he read it?" I thought about Richard's confession in my office. I was looking for a way out of the marriage. I couldn't tell her that. That was his truth to share, or not. "He said he was wrong," I said carefully. "He said he understands things differently now." It was enough for her. She nodded, the relief evident on her face. "I have to believe we can come back from this. This has to be our second chance." Back in the lab, I watched the technicians process Richard's blood. The cross-match test is simple in theory. You mix the donor cells with the recipient serum. You look for a reaction. You hope for none. A positive cross-match means the recipient has antibodies that will attack the donor's kidney. It's an absolute deal-breaker. I held my breath as I watched the assay. The minutes stretched. The lab was silent except for the hum of equipment. Then the result. Negative. No reaction. They were still a match. Biologically, at least. His body was still willing to save hers. I found Richard in the waiting area outside radiology. He was back in his street clothes, sipping a terrible hospital coffee. "The cross-match is negative," I told him. "You're still a match." He closed his eyes for a second. A wave of something, relief, resignation, passed over his face. "Good. That's good. The CT looked clean too. Your renal anatomy is perfect for donation." I sat down next to him. The plastic chair was cold. "The final step is the psych evaluation. It's standard. They just need to make sure you're mentally prepared, that you're not being coerced." He gave me a sideways look. "Are you asking if I feel coerced?" "I'm telling you what the process is." He put his coffee cup down on the small table between us. It left a wet ring on the wood. I'm not being coerced. I'm choosing this. For the first time since she got sick, it feels like my choice. The psychologist, Dr. Irene Rossi, met with him for an hour. I paced the hallway outside her office. This was the last real hurdle. If she flagged him as unstable or uncertain, the hospital board would pull the plug. They wouldn't risk it. When the door finally opened, Richard emerged first. He looked calm, tired but calm. Dr. Rossi followed him out. She caught my eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "He's cleared," she said quietly to me, as Richard walked down the hall toward Megan's room. "He's emotionally raw, obviously, but his resolve is clear. He understands the risks and the permanence. He's doing it for the right reasons." The right reasons? What were the right reasons? Love? Guilt? A desperate attempt to fix something that might be broken beyond repair? In medicine, we don't have a test for that. I went to the scheduling desk. Linda was there, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "He's cleared," I said. "All tests are green. We need an OR." She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "You know this is moving at lightning speed. Most living donor evaluations take weeks. This has taken less than 48 hours. "Megan doesn't have weeks," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "Her creatinine levels are still climbing. Every day we wait, the surgery gets riskier for her." She sighed, a sound of pure professional exhaustion. "I've tentatively booked OR3 for tomorrow, 7 a.m. It was held for an elective gallbladder that got postponed. It's yours if you want it." Tomorrow. It was really happening. The speed of it was dizzying. From refusal to surgery in under 2 days? "Book it," I said. I went to tell them both together. I found Richard sitting in the chair by Megan's bed. He was holding her hand. They weren't talking. They were just sitting there, together, in the quiet. The letter was on the bedside table, a silent witness. They both looked up when I entered. "It's scheduled," I said. "Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock." The words hung in the room. This was it, the point of no return. Megan's grip on Richard's hand tightened. "Tomorrow," she whispered. Richard looked from her to me. His face was a mask of determination. "Okay," he said. Just one word, but it held the weight of 1,000 promises. I left them there, preparing for a surgery that was about so much more than an organ. It was about forgiveness. It was about a future they weren't sure they still had. I walked back to my office, the reality of tomorrow settling on me. I was going to cut a man open and take a part of him to put inside his wife. I was betting everything on the hope that this physical gift could heal wounds no scalpel could ever touch. The biggest risk in this entire procedure wasn't medical. It was emotional, and there was no consent form for that. The silence in my office was heavy. It was the kind of quiet that feels loud. I could still see Richard's face when he said he was looking for a way out of the marriage. His words were stuck in my head. Her silence was a prison, but my indifference was the guard. I looked at the family photo on my desk again. My wife was smiling, but I remembered the phone call I missed last week. Her voice had been tight when I finally called back. "It's fine, Ethan. It was just our son's school play. We managed." That was a silence I had created. A small one. But Richard was right. They grow. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my own mess. It was Linda. "The board wants a final meeting, now, in the conference room on the 5th floor. Her voice was all business, no warmth. I knew what this was about. They were going to make me justify this. They were going to make me defend a decision that was more about heart than hospital policy. I straightened my white coat and walked out. The hallway seemed longer than usual. Every door I passed felt like it was watching me. The nephrology wing was usually full of sound, beeping monitors, murmured conversations. Right now, it was just the sound of my own shoes on the linoleum. I pushed the button for the elevator. The wait felt like forever. The conference room had a huge glass table. Dr. Evans was there. So was the head of the hospital board, a woman named Carol Vance. She had a reputation for being tough, all business. She didn't smile when I walked in. Linda was there too, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "Dr. Blake," Carol started. No hello. "Walk us through the Hartley case, from the top." She leaned back in her chair. Her eyes didn't leave my face. So I did. I told them everything. About Richard's first refusal, the coldness in his voice, the way Megan cried without making a sound. I told them about finding the letter. I admitted I read it. I saw Carol's eyebrow twitch when I said that, a breach of ethics. I didn't hide from it. "And you believed this letter, this emotional appeal, was grounds to reapproach the donor?" Dr. Evans asked. His tone was flat. "It wasn't an appeal. It was a confession," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were clenched under the table. It provided context. He wasn't refusing because of a medical fear. He was refusing because he felt betrayed. He was using her sickness as an exit strategy from a marriage he already wanted to leave. "And you think that's better?" Carol asked. "You think a donor motivated by guilt is safer than one motivated by fear?" "I think a donor who is making a fully informed choice is the only safe donor," I said. He was refusing based on a partial truth. Now he has the whole story. His choice is real now. It's messy. It's emotional, but it's his. Linda spoke up. "The psych eval is clear. All the tests are green. Medically and psychologically, he is a suitable donor. The speed is unconventional, but the patient's declining health warrants it." Carol looked from Linda to me. The clock on the wall ticked. 5 seconds, 10. "This is a publicity nightmare waiting to happen," she said finally. "If he gets on that table tomorrow and has a change of heart, if there's a complication, if this ends in a lawsuit, the narrative is that a doctor emotionally manipulated a man into a surgery he didn't want." I knew she was right. I had thought of that. In the quiet of the night, I had played that scenario out in my head 100 times. "With all due respect," I said, leaning forward, "the narrative, if we do nothing, is that a man let his wife die over a secret she kept from him before she even knew him, that she died believing he hated her. I can live with the risk to my career. I'm not sure I could live with that." The room went silent again. Carol studied me. She was looking for a crack, for doubt. "Your career is not the only thing at stake here, Dr. Blake. The hospital's reputation is too." "I understand that," I said. "But our reputation is also built on doing what's right for the patient, not what's easiest. Megan Hartley needs that kidney. Her husband is willing to give it. The only thing standing in the way was a lie. Now it's gone." Carol exchanged a look with Dr. Evans. He gave a small, almost invisible shrug. "Fine," she said. The word was sharp. "The surgery is a go. But understand this, Ethan. You are the attending surgeon. The responsibility for the outcome, all outcomes, rests solely on you. If this goes sideways, the hospital will not be shielding you. Are we clear?" "Crystal," I said. I stood up and left the room. My heart was pounding. I had just bet my entire career on a man's guilt and a woman's hope. I walked back toward the nephrology wing. I needed to see them. I needed to see if the hope in their eyes was strong enough to justify the risk I had just taken. I found Richard in the family lounge. He was alone, staring at a vending machine. He wasn't putting money in. He was just looking at it. "Tough meeting?" he asked, without turning around. He must have heard it in my footsteps. "You could say that," I replied, stopping beside him. "They're worried I'm going to bolt." It wasn't a question. "They're worried about the stability of your decision. It's their job to worry." He finally turned to look at me. The fluorescent lights made the lines on his face look deeper. "I'm not going to bolt, Dr. Blake. I made a promise. To her, and to myself. I believe you," I said. And in that moment, I did. "I called my lawyer today," he said, his voice low. "Before the psych eval. I had him draw up new documents. I'm putting half of my assets into a trust for her, no matter what happens tomorrow. No matter what happens with us after this, she'll be taken care of. I was stunned. This wasn't just about a kidney anymore. This was about legacy, about making things right in a way that went far beyond an operating room. That's a significant gesture, Richard. It's not a gesture, he said, his voice firm. It's a down payment on being the man I should have been all along. He looked back at the vending machine. I was going to get her a candy bar. She used to love these cheap chocolate bars. I haven't bought her one in years. He shoved his hands in his pockets. It's the stupid little things, you know. The things you stop doing. That's how you know it's over. You stop buying the candy bars. He walked away then, leaving me standing in the harsh light of the lounge. I thought about the last time I brought my wife flowers. I couldn't remember. Richard was right. It's the stupid little things. The silence starts there, in the empty spaces where the candy bars and the flowers used to be. I went to check on Megan one last time before I left for the night. She was asleep. Her breathing was shallow but steady. The letter was still on her bedside table. I wondered if she had asked Richard about it. I wondered if he had told her about his own confessions, the trust fund, the way out of the marriage. I hoped not. Some truths are too heavy to carry into major surgery. I drove home in the dark. The New York lights blurred past my window. My own house was dark and quiet when I got there. Everyone was asleep. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, just listening to the silence. It felt different now. It felt like a choice I was making. I made a mental note to call my wife during my lunch break tomorrow, to ask about her day, to really listen, to buy flowers on my way home. Because Richard Hartley was teaching me something. A transplant isn't just an organ moving from one body to another. It's a wake-up call. It's a second chance for everyone it touches. And tomorrow, in OR3, we would all be under the lights, hoping for a miracle that was more than just medical. We were hoping for a new beginning. The silence in the pre-op holding area was a living thing. It was 6:15 a.m. Megan was already sedated, a gentle haze pulling her under. Her hand was limp in Richard's. He was dressed in a hospital gown, a blue hairnet covering his dark hair. He looked smaller without his clothes, more vulnerable. "They're going to take me back first," he said, his voice quiet. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at her, at the slow, steady rise of her chest. "That's the procedure," I said, pulling on my own sterile gown. The fabric was stiff. It smelled of bleach and anticipation. "You'll take care of her while I'm out." He finally met my eyes. The fear was there, just beneath the surface, but so was the resolve. "I will. My team is the best in the city. We're going to take good care of both of you." It was the standard reassurance. Today, it felt like a prayer. The OR nurses came for him. He leaned over and kissed Megan's forehead, a long, soft kiss. He whispered something I couldn't hear. Then he let go of her hand and followed them down the hall. He didn't look back. I stood there for a moment, watching Megan sleep. I thought about the letter, the secret daughter, the years of silence. All of it had led to this cold, bright hallway. I placed my hand on her arm. "Be strong," I whispered. Then I turned and walked to OR3. The room was a controlled chaos of beeps and chilled air. Richard was on the table, asleep. The anesthesia was doing its work. The green drapes were up, creating a sterile field. His side was prepped and painted with brown antiseptic. I looked at the monitor. His heart rate was strong and steady. He was a healthy man, a perfect donor. My lead surgeon for the donor nephrectomy, Dr. Sharma, was already scrubbed in. She gave me a nod. "Vitals are perfect. We're ready when you are." I took my place. The first cut is always the same, a precise incision. The smell of cauterized flesh filled the air. We worked in a quiet rhythm. My job was to be ready for the kidney, to receive it and prepare Megan's body. But I watched as they carefully dissected down. They exposed the renal artery, the vein. They were so delicate. This was the part of him that would save her. It felt like hours, but it was only 45 minutes later when Dr. Sharma said, "It's free." She held the kidney in her gloved hands. It was a deep reddish brown, healthy, vital. She placed it gently in a basin of ice slush saline. "It's a beautiful kidney, Ethan." I took the basin. It was heavier than I expected. Or maybe the weight was all in my head. This was Richard's promise, his guilt, his love, all contained in this one organ. I carried it out of the room and into the adjacent OR where Megan was now waiting. Her body was open. We had already prepared the site in her pelvis. We don't usually put the new kidney where the old ones are. It's easier, safer to place it here. My hands were steady as I began the vascular anastomosis, sewing the tiny arteries and veins together. This is the most critical part. One slip, one tiny mistake. The connection fails, the kidney dies, she dies. The silence in this room was different. It was the silence of absolute focus. The only sounds were my own breathing and the soft, rhythmic beep of Megan's heart monitor. I could feel the eyes of my entire team on my hands. Stitch, stitch, tie. My world shrank to the space between my fingers, to the tiny threads connecting this man to this woman. Finally, it was done. The connections were secure. "Release the clamps," I said. This is the moment of truth. We released the vascular clamps. Blood rushed into the pale, cool kidney. I watched, barely breathing. For a second, nothing. Then, a blush of pink. A beautiful, healthy color spread across the surface of the organ. It was perfusing. It was alive inside her. A collective, quiet sigh went through the room. It was working. But we weren't done. We had to wait. We had to see if it would make urine. That's the real sign of life. That's the function we were all praying for. Minutes ticked by. I stared at the ureter, the tube that would carry the urine to her bladder. It was still dry. Come on, I thought. Please, do your job. And then I saw it. A single clear drop of fluid beaded at the end of the tube. Then another. And then a slow, steady trickle. The kidney was making urine. It was functioning. "We have output," I said. My voice cracked. The mood in the room shifted. The tension broke. There were smiles behind the masks. We closed her up. The surgery was a success. Medically, it was over. I went out to the waiting room to find Richard's sister. She was the only family they had there. She was pacing, her phone clutched in her hand. "It's over," I told her. "They're both in recovery. The kidney is in, and it's working." She burst into tears. Happy tears, relieved tears. "Oh, thank God. Thank you, doctor." I left her there and went to the surgeon's lounge. I sat down on a stiff leather couch. I put my head in my hands. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving me hollow and exhausted. I had done it. I had bet my career on this. And I had won. But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving. The real work was just beginning for them. The recovery, the conversations, the life after. I went to see Richard first. He was groggy, in pain, but awake. "It's in," I told him. "It's working." He closed his eyes. A single tear escaped and rolled down his temple into his hair. "Good," he whispered. That was all. Then I went to Megan's room. She was still asleep, the ventilator breathing for her. But she looked different already. The gray, sickly pallor was gone from her skin. She just looked like a woman sleeping. The machine by her bed showed her creatinine levels. They were already dropping. Her body was accepting the gift. I stood there for a long time, just watching the numbers improve. Proof that it had worked. Proof that a part of him was now a part of her, cleaning her blood, giving her a future. It was 3 days later when I saw them together again. Richard was in a wheelchair, being pushed by a nurse into Megan's room. He was pale and moved carefully, protecting his incision. But he was there. Megan was sitting up in bed. She was weak, but her eyes were clear. They hadn't seen each other since the morning of the surgery. He wheeled himself close to her bed. They didn't say anything at first. They just looked at each other. The air was thick with everything that was unsaid. "Thank you," Megan whispered, her voice raspy from the tube. Richard reached out and took her hand. He didn't let go. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Tired," she said, "but clean. For the first time in years, I feel clean." He nodded. He understood. He was clean too. The secret was out. The anger was spent. All that was left was this fragile new space between them, a space they would have to build something new in. I backed out of the room and closed the door softly. It was their time now. I saw them once more, a week later, the day they were both discharged. They were leaving separately. Richard was going to his sister's. Megan was going to a rehab facility. They weren't going home together. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But they were standing by the hospital entrance. The sun was shining. Richard held a single, cheap chocolate bar in his hand. He gave it to her. She took it and smiled. A small, sad smile. "I'll call you," he said. "I know," she replied. He turned and got into his sister's car. Megan watched him drive away. Then she turned and got into the transport van. They were going in different directions. But they were both alive. They both had a chance. I walked back to my office. The photo of my family was still on my desk. I picked up my phone and called my wife. "Hey," I said, "I'm coming home early today." "Really?" She sounded surprised. "Hopeful?" "Yeah, I thought I'd like to hear about your day. And I'm going to stop and get flowers." There was a pause on the other end of the line. A good pause. "I'd like that, Ethan. I'd like that a lot." I hung up the phone. The Hartley story wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy and complicated and real. They might make it. They might not. But they had a chance. And sometimes, in medicine and in life, a chance is the only miracle you get. A chance to fix what's broken. A chance to forgive. A chance to buy flowers on the way home. If this story made you feel something, if it made you think about the secrets we keep and the chances we take, then do me a favor. Hit that like button, leave a comment down below, and subscribe. You never know which story will change everything.